All right. Welcome to Q&A episode 8. It's been 8 weeks, I think. Yeah, so 8 weeks of Q&As, and I'm starting to like them better and better. A lot of questions this week, a lot to dig into. Looking forward to it. Special shout out to Philip and Pascal, who I saw at the Human Performance Summit, or this year it's called Conference this weekend. A lot of good info, and I'm very glad to have you on here as always. So yeah, let's get started. Share screen should be working this time. Let's give it a go. Final check. If you cannot hear me, let me know. I think everything is in order this time. I made sure, kind of. So let's do this. All right. So the first question I had for a specialization cycle. Okay, let's just fix this up first, make it a little bit bigger. Yes. All right. A specialization cycle. How do you allocate the volume through the program design? For example, a client wants to focus on shoulders and glutes. What is the volume percentage you allocate in these muscles and down in others? Well, I don't think you should train other muscles trying to focus on certain muscles. So basically, I would optimize the training volume for every single muscle based on how advanced it is. So that comes down to testing the rep maximum for example, for the Romanian deadlift to see how advanced the hamstrings and the posterior chain is, for the hip thrust to see how advanced the glutes are, etc., and maybe the overhead press to see how advanced the shoulders are. And based on that, I would have a weekly volume for these muscles. And then when you want to emphasize them, you want to actually order the muscles in the right direction. So at the start of the workout, you will be freshest and you will be doing your most productive work. So you actually, as you can see in the example, want to order your shoulder and glute exercises first, even before exercises like squats and deadlifts, if this is really your focus. So, for example, here you see that I combined the standing dumbbell overhead press with the Bulgarian split squat. Good combo. You can easily do them together. Also, as the next exercise, I combined the face pull, which is on a cable, with the Romanian deadlift. A little bit harder to combine, but you could do it. You could do some deadlifts and squat rack, and then just leave it over there and run over to the cable machine and do some face pulls for your shoulders and for your trapezius. So that's something to remember. You should not decrease volume because you're just you should not decrease volume for other muscles because you're trying to focus certain muscles. You should just focus on the exercise order. That's the most important thing. All right, so next question. When you got a new client, what kind of information do you provide? I give them the Bayesian guides. That's from the Bayesian PT course. It's from Menno Henselman's, the guy that I'm working with on an education. And I'm working on a hunger management and a small nutrition guide. That's great. That's cool. That's very valuable, of course. I think it's too much info, but it's all relevant. What are your thoughts? Well, I think there should be a master document that they should always be able to refer to. For example, what I send them is the program guidelines. This is based on some of Henselman's methods. It's just a big, I think like 20 to 30 page document where everything is outlined, all the tips, the executions for the workout, the structure for the workout, nutrition, overall tips, stuff like that, well-being, etc. And they don't have to read all of it at once, which I also state in the email, but they have to read through it and scan through it before they start asking questions. So they can always go back to that document when they are confused or they forgot how to do something. And then the email itself, I will keep the information at a minimum as far as that's possible. I will definitely, recently I split my starting email up into 2 versions or 2 parts. And the second part would be sent 4 days automatically after the first. You can, for example, do this with Boomerang, which makes you, which enables you to schedule your emails up front. Welcome, by the way, viewers. If you have any questions in between, then you can just ask them in the group chat over at the right. I think over at the left top corner, you can select the message box. Hope you can hear me clearly. So yeah, you definitely don't want to overwhelm them with too many instructions at once. You should have a big reference guide, as I said, but when it comes to specific instructions, keep it to a minimum. They are very motivated at the start mostly, so they will be able to implement a lot of stuff at the same time, but you would want to tackle it when it comes up with them and they start asking about it, or when the time is sufficient. You can also just create a timeline for yourself, for your own reference, with to-do tasks to ask them throughout the weeks, so you can remember yourself of your process. You never want to instill too many habits at once. The basics come first. So first, ask them to weigh themselves every day, for example, or to note down the hours of sleep they get or their calories, etc. Don't try to get them into doing everything at once, because that's not how habits are formed most successfully. So I hope that helps. Next one, I'm struggling with volume and sets. The Bayesian table I get during the course, again, about the PT course that we were earlier referring to, isn't really clear to me. For example, oh, it isn't really clear to me. That's the question. I'm sorry. So what I would suggest is some basic guidelines, and these are very rough guidelines, I must tell you, because it depends on so many things, how much volume you should prescribe, and also during the process itself, you should be testing and seeing how you're recovering, so you can adjust. And this mostly comes with experience, but I can give you some insights in how I do it, of course. You can also check out the work capacity post I did before on how to decide whether the volume you determined for your clients is high enough or too low, maybe. And you could do that after 4 or 5, 6 weeks, for example, to see how they're doing. But in general, beginners, 8 to 12 sets per muscle per week, intermediate 13 to 20, advanced 21, all the way up to 40 if someone has amazing genetics. If they're still natural, amazing genetics, especially for the smaller muscle groups, and black people often fare better on higher volumes because they do have better genetics in general. And women also tend to be able to do more sets per week per muscle group. And then what happens through circumstances, if someone's dieting, then I would cut back 20% of the volume. So basically their recovery capacity is affected because the energy availability is lower. So therefore they can tolerate less volume. So I would take 80% of the regular maintenance optimal volume. And then if they're bulking, they can stand a little bit more volume because they have more energy availability, and yeah, therefore their recovery resources are higher. So 110% of the optimal amounts for maintenance would be more sufficient, more suitable, I must say. And then the most important parts, this is a deal breaker or deal maker, stress and sleep. If stress is high and sleep is low, you have to cut volume in half compared to optimal recovery, because their recovery rates will be a lot a lot lower. So definitely keep that in mind. Those are just some rough guidelines. And how I do this in practice is I just have these in my programming. I have these multipliers. For example, I have 3 different workouts that they do, and they do them 5 times per week. So in essence, they will be doing every single workout 1.67 times per week. And then you can basically see the weekly sets for the chest press or the dumbbell press, and you can add those up with the other chest exercise. But there's actually a volume counter we're now developing, which is coming soon. I'm not sure if this will be available for free or not. We have to think about how we're going to present it, but it's in the making. Okay, next question. We are aware that the anabolic window can vary based on a number of factors. Is there a definitive way to find out whether this elevated time frame, when this elevated time frame and how long it lasts? Are there any cheap monitors or at-home tools that can detect the elevated levels of MPS? Well, there aren't any cheap or easy tools. I mean, you can go to a lab and get like a part of your muscle taken out and then put it up for analysis, but that's most often not what people want to do. It's mostly for research. So again, the anabolic window, just like the optimal volume, it depends on so many things, but stress levels, sleep levels, and training status, those 3 I think are the most important. You can read more about this in my 2 articles. If you just Google glute frequency, then they should pop up. One is on BayesianBodybuilding.com. Those should give you some more info. But the cheapest monitor is actually, and the most accurate, is your strength. If you're consistently getting strength in a compound exercise, that is your best measure of being recovered, because the definition of recovery is that your strength is back up to its old level. And if you're even stronger than last time, then you have super compensated. So you've grown more muscle, or you have become even more efficient and at activating the muscle with your CNS, with your central nervous system. So that is definitely something I want to drill down. And a lot of people don't watch their strength or don't see it as a measure of their progress, but it's so important. Like when one of my clients goes down in strength, and it happens consistently, we know that something needs to happen. Like volume needs to go down, calories need to go up, something needs to happen in the recovery capacity departments, and that's the best estimate you have. Also depends on how many sets you do for a specific muscle for a workout. For example, in the bottom right corner here, you see that one set elevates protein synthesis 5 hours after and 29 hours after. But actually, if you do 3 sets for the same muscle group for that person with their training status and all, they will actually have a longer anabolic window. So in general, I would say very advanced people with very high, with very low stress, they have about 16 hours and they can go at it again, especially females. For beginners, for totally untrained people, it can last as long as 3 or 4 days. For most people, I would say 1 to 2 days is how long you should wait between workouts, and then you should tweak it by yourself. But often spreading your total volume over more sessions is beneficial. And like the recent meta-analysis from Greg Nuckols showed, it gives 22% extra muscle growth if you add 1 session per week. So 4 sessions would give 100% muscle growth, then 5 sessions would give 122, then 6 sessions would give about 146, 47, etc. So that's something to keep in mind. And here you see what stress does. Let's see what the untrained and trained person's recovery looks like when it comes to protein synthesis. So a more trained person will probably recover within 16 to 28 hours in this case. Okay, is there an optimal distribution of saturated and monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fat percentages within one's fat macro allotment? Breaking that down even further, is there an optimal balance of omega-3 and omega-6? Well, let me first check whether I got any more questions. Let me check. All right, nope. Okay, back. Yeah, I think it's not worth watching this, to be honest. Of course, you should be sure that you're getting enough saturated fat to increase hormone levels, because research shows that's very correlated with your testosterone, estrogen, all the anabolic hormones basically. But you should not be watching for mono or saturated or polyunsaturated fat balances. That's going a little bit too far. I would rather just focus on good fat sources like eggs, meats, fatty meats, dairy, avocado, generally considered healthy, good fat sources. And basically the rest will handle itself. And for omega-3, this is very, very important. This is one study. This one was funded, I have to say, by a supplement company, but there are multiple studies like this that show a lot better recovery when you're taking about 1 to 3 grams of fish oil or omega-3s per day. So definitely focus on that. That's something I drill down with every one of my clients. It makes such a big difference. And this is a very good brand, Rosita cod liver oil. Very low oxidation rates, highly recommended, and it's pretty low cost compared to the other ones. What are the principles behind Volume Calculator shown in the past Q&A? I think you're referring to the Volume Calculator that's part of the Hanselman's PT course. And the principles behind it is recovery capacity. The higher your recovery capacity, the more volume you can tolerate and the more you can grow per week. And your recovery capacity depends on many factors. And these are just a few. Your stress levels, very important one. Your energy availability, that means whether you're bulking or cutting. Your sleep is extremely important. And it's almost no one really appreciates how important sleep really is. But the difference between 5 hours of sleep per day and 8 hours of sleep per day is day and nights. So yeah, it's tremendously important, especially during cutting, to hold on to your muscle mass. You really want to sleep a lot. Otherwise, you're going to burn your muscle. A bigger proportion of your weight loss is going to be muscle. And this also goes for bulking. Just sleep is very important. Really prioritize that. Other than that, it's genetics. Not really much you can do about that. Your training status, the more advanced you are, the more, well, your recovery capacity increases, but the more actual volume you need to stimulate ongoing growth. And then gender, in general, women can tolerate more volume and have higher recovery capacity than men because of their blood flow and because they have less muscle damage from the same exercise amounts. So let's look at the next question. Could you count me? Specifically, one person wanted to know the volume for her glutes. Her data are the hip thrust 130 kilograms for 5 reps. One plan to build up. I'm not sure what that specifically means. Sleep 7 hours on average, and a level stress is average. So I would put that on a recovery factor of 0.8 because she's a little bit stressed, and her sleep could be better. I think depends. Everyone needs different amounts of sleep. So it's not a 1 or 1.2, which is being completely relaxed and having the least stress and best sleep you can imagine, and 0.5 being an office worker with very high stress, working 80 to 100 hours per week, for example, getting not a lot of sleep. She's a female, so I put 1. Training status, I would say for 130 kilograms for 5 legitimate reps, that's quite advanced. So then with an energy balance factor of 1, which would put you at maintenance, which you should never do, always cut or bulk, just make a decision. Then your estimated optimal sets per week per muscle group, in this case the glutes, would be 26. So hovering around that, experimenting with that, and seeing how you recover from that would be a good ballpark estimate. Then distribute this over as many sessions as you can. Some people even like to do it 2 times per week, so a morning and afternoon training. Of course, a lot of people think it's not feasible, and that's fine. It's not going to make that much of a difference. So 4 to 7 sessions per week should be good. Hope that helps. In one of your webinars, you mentioned that it is the last 5 repetitions that lead to growth, if I understood you correctly. Well, in most cases, these are the effective reps, so to say. So this is the time when the type 2 fibers really come into play. And the type 2 fibers are the fibers that have the most potential for growth. So if you're doing a very low weight, then basically the first 20 repetitions you do are going to be all type 1 fibers or type 2A, which is a little bit slow twitch. And then later on in the set, the bigger motor units, as you can see over here, later on in the set, those come into play. So let's have a look. So basically, when you're doing a low weight, you start up here, and there is a lot of type 1 fiber recruitments, motor units that are attached to type 1 fibers, which are slow twitch, which don't have a lot of potential to growth. And from a certain point, you're going to need those bigger motor units with type 2 muscle fibers that are very prone to grow. And you also see this in the muscle activity. Basically, muscle activity starts at 50% when you're having a very 30% of your max 1 rep max, and then it comes close to doing 5 repetitions or 6 repetitions with 80% of your 1 rep max. So it's not gonna reach it, but it's gonna come very close. So back to the question. I'm sorry, I veered out a little bit. How do you use this model, and how do you do with reps in reserve? How do you distribute it in a weekly cycle also? Well, for most of my clients are not powerlifters. In the case of powerlifters, I would probably do it differently. But if you're just going for muscle growth and overall strength, then we're going to stick with 1 rep in reserve. That means 1 repetition from failure. Because if you do the extra repetition, that's going to cause a lot of neuromuscular fatigue, and that's going to increase your recovery time a lot. So maybe the next workout, you will not be ready for working that muscle with maximum productivity again. So you actually want to have this ratio be as much in the advantage of extra stimulus. So with that 1 rep to failure, you will get a little bit extra stimulus, but a lot more neuromuscular fatigue. So generally, you want to stay 1 rep away at least from failure. Of course, failure training has its purpose, but most often I don't recommend it. Then I implement it by being linearly progressive. So every workout, we increase either in reps or in weight for that exercise. And later on, if it gets more difficult, we will switch to daily undulated periodization. Mostly, those are more advanced progression models. And then you should consider that myo reps are a big time saver, because basically if you're doing myo reps with like 60% of your 1 rep max, then you can do 15 to 20 repetitions, and then you come in this area. If you then the effective reps basically, and if you then rest for 10 seconds, and if you start again, you will not start at the beginning point. No, your muscle fibers will still be fatigued, so you start here again. So basically you're replicating those effective reps, and those effective reps are particularly what you want to do for muscle growth. So that's great, and it's good to save a lot of time. I often implement it when I don't have a lot of time left with clients, or I myself have to hurry up to get somewhere to a big important meeting or something. Yes. Your opinion about lactic metabolic training style. For example, ropes for 30 reps with your 8 to 10 rep max. I read that and I was like, is that right? Because that to me seems very difficult. But I guess you mean that you just started with your 8 to 10 rep max, then rest for 30 seconds, then stop the set, and then continue with the set until you finally have done the total 30 reps. So for example, it would go like 9, 8, 8, 8, 7, or something like that. Well, I'm not really a fan of lactic metabolic training style. I think it just beats around the bush, basically. The most important thing for muscle growth, the overlapping stimulus, basically, and I had a lot of talks with Henselmans about this too, is the average mechanical tension on type 2 fibers mostly, multiplied by the time under tension. And this doesn't mean you can just hold your dumbbell still and not move. You should apply the time under tension over the full length of the muscle belly. So that's why you need the full range of motion. And that makes bands, chains, and Bayesian exercises very good because they increase the average mechanical tension. As you can see here from the image below, at the top you have 0 mechanical tension on the chest if you're doing a dumbbell fly, basically. But here with the Bayesian fly, from the other side, at the top you do have some resistance from the cables. So mechanical tension is still there. So the average mechanical tension over the entire movement is going to be much higher for the Bayesian fly than for the dumbbell fly. And that's why this is a much more effective exercise. I hope that makes sense. So basically, there is no research that shows that metabolic stress directly influences muscle growth, maybe only for a little time. But what it mostly does is it increases the mechanical, basically, let's put it this way, it makes it that you have to use type 2 fibers more. So basically, indirectly, it causes muscle growth because it increases mechanical tension, and mechanical tension then causes muscle growth. That's a little bit hard to explain. Hope to get back to that later. Can you explain more about the nutrition for glycogen depletion training? Let's say the photo shoot is on Sunday 10 a.m. and I work out on Thursday afternoon. How many carbs will I need to ingest for the day as well as Friday and Saturday? And also the methods of water and sodium manipulation until the photo shoot day. I will, in this webinar, I want to save going into the water and sodium manipulation because it's quite a lot of content, and it's quite a lot of it's quite a lot to explain in one slide. So I will focus a little bit more on the amount of carbohydrates, but because that is very confusing indeed, and I want to give a little bit of an example. So the maximum storage is about 1,200 grams of carbs for a 200-pound man for 1 day, basically. So while it's also using up the carbohydrates. So basically, if you're a man, then you want to look at your regular carb intake, and you want to add 6 grams per kilogram on top of it. If you're doing a sufficient low-carb diet before your depletion training, and your depletion training is sufficient to deplete about 50%, for example, of your carbohydrate stores, then this is, in general, a good number. More specifically, it's going to change. It's going to need a lot of experimentation, but in general, this is a good number. So, for example, if you normally eat 2,800 calories per day, then you want to minimize fats in your diet during your refeed, because the fat is going to go straight to your fat stores because there's a surplus of calories always there. You want to just take your optimal protein in, so 1.8 gram per kilogram, and then if you calculate those, this will leave about 1,600 calories of those 2,800 left for carbohydrates, which is 400 grams of carbs. So that's your normal intake, basically. And on top of this, after your depletion workout, basically 24 hours after this, the 24 to 36 hours after this, that's how long it takes to replenish the glycogen stores, you want to add 6 grams per kilogram, 80 kilograms, basically 80 kilograms, about 200 pounds of carbs. So that means 480 grams of carbs. So in total, that would leave you at 880 grams of carbs that you have in a 24-hour period with optimal protein and low amounts of fat. For example, the maximum would be 50 grams. And you want to start directly after your depletion training with 100 grams of quickly digesting carbs. And then basically the rest of the day, it doesn't really matter where you get the carbs from. Don't take too much fructose, because that cannot store inside your muscle glycogen stores. So focus mostly on starchy carbs and just have as many meals as you like. Pancakes are good. Just make sure to cut the fat. There are a lot of low-fat pancake recipes out there. I love them. So just some insight in how I would do that. Do you have any tips or guidelines on how to learn a client who has never counted a calorie in his or her life to count calories? How to teach them to count calories? What I think is the most essential thing, if they have never done this, is creating awareness. They should have a rough awareness of, like a banana has 100 calories, a slice of bread has 70 calories. And if they have this awareness, then most often they will also become curious about certain things they have been eating for years, like how many calories they contain. And MyFitnessPal or any other tool is great for this. It's very basic, but just tell them, hey, I want you to track your calories for 2 days this week, and then next week we'll talk about it, and we'll do a quick analysis, and we'll talk about what you ate and what surprised you, etc. That's what I mostly do with these type of clients. It also cultivates nutrition intelligence. Basically, if they're getting very much into it, they will develop a lot of knowledge about how many calories certain things contain. And they should start looking at food labels and see if they're showing the same thing as the MyFitnessPal, and that's also a great practice for them to get a general idea of how many calories they are ingesting. And of course, you should give some guidelines. An average woman would need about 2,000 calories per day to maintain her weight, and then basically that's their measurement point, or the benchmark point where they could benchmark it against. And later on, you could go deeper into it or create a meal plan or something like that. But that's how I would start it with these types of clients. And do you have any pointers and guidelines for pelvic pain in pregnancy? I do, but this question leads a little bit more specific hints on where that pain is coming from, during which exercises, and basically I need a more complete assessment to answer this question. What I can recommend is this great website, girlsgonestrong.com. It's a great resource for pre- and postnatal training. They also have written books on this. They have a great coaching program. So definitely they're the experts in the field, I think, when it comes to training around pregnancy. So definitely check them out if you haven't already. And I think that's it for today. I don't see any extra questions. Thanks to the people that are watching for sticking it out with me for 35 minutes. I hope I answered the question sufficiently. If not, just let me know via private message or whatever, and maybe I can get a little more deeper into it. Really appreciate you being here, taking the time, and I will see you in the next episode. So until then, bye-bye.